Did you know that Max Verstappen's last two victories not only reignited the title fight, but also put McLaren on the ropes? Red Bull has won again at Monza and Baku, but will it be enough to challenge McLaren in Singapore? What looked like a historic resurgence could come to nothing this weekend. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, do you think Red Bull can maintain this momentum in Marina Bay? Or do you think Verstappen really has a chance of making a comeback in this championship? Stay until the end, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. In this video, we'll break down how Red Bull arrives at the 2025 Singapore Grand Prix after two consecutive victories by Max Verstappen and what real chances it has of halting the absolute dominance of McLaren, which has won 12 of the 17 races contested this season. The arrival of Laurent Mekies as the new team principal in July marked a shift in the team's working philosophy, and although the first results were not encouraging, the last two races in Monza and Baku ignited a spark of hope that seemed lost. However, the truth is that this resurgence must be analyzed carefully because it reflects both the RB21's strengths in specific scenarios and the team's ability to adapt in more favorable environments. The most significant aspect of this context is that Red Bull has gone from being practically eliminated from the championship fight to unexpectedly closing the gap. Max Verstappen, after convincing victories on two circuits with very different characteristics, reduced a seemingly insurmountable deficit from 109 to 69 points in just two races. However, that gap is still considerable, and with only 7 Grands Prix and 3 sprints remaining on the calendar, the title chances remain more mathematical than realistic. This tension between illusion and reality is what defines the team's current momentum, and it is what makes the Singapore Grand Prix a crucial test to measure whether the recovery is genuine or merely a mirage. It must also be taken into account that the RB21 is an extremely sensitive car, a single-seater that transforms depending on the type of track and external conditions. In low-speed scenarios, the car is capable of adapting to the needs of the team. Under the influence of downforce and cooler temperatures, such as Monza, Red Bull showed its best side, exploiting its efficiency on the straights and confirming improvements in traction in slow corners. The same thing happened in Baku, where the car felt comfortable again and Verstappen managed to impose his pace with an unexpected superiority. But these conditions bear little resemblance to what awaits in Singapore, a circuit that has historically exposed Red Bull's weaknesses: extreme heat, high humidity, constant traction in tight corners, and an asphalt that demands perfect tire control and balance. In this context, the big question is whether the technical advances introduced at Monza, which have benefited Red Bull so much in recent weeks, will be enough to remain competitive on a track that demands the complete opposite of what the RB21 has shown so far. Is Red Bull's resurgence truly solid, or is it a mirage fueled by two tracks that play to its strengths? Engineers, analysts, and rivals agree that the package of updates introduced at Monza was a step forward, but there is still considerable skepticism about whether these improvements can be sustained in venues as demanding as Singapore. The rumor mill around the teams is that the RB21 still has structural limitations, and that neither the new floor nor the specific wings are enough to completely change the nature of a car that has historically struggled in high downforce conditions. The general perception within the paddock is that Red Bull found a lifeline on two tracks that played to its advantage. Monza is a circuit of pure power, where straight-line efficiency made the difference, and Baku offers long straights combined with heavy braking, an ideal environment for a car that regained traction and stability in low-speed areas. However, looking ahead to Singapore, many rivals believe the story will be different. At Marina Bay, tire temperature control, the ability to attack curbs, and consistency in slow corners make the difference. Laurent Mekies has insisted that the victories at Monza and Baku should not be interpreted as a magic bullet, but rather as the result of a series of small adjustments that worked under specific circumstances. This has created the impression that the team itself is wary of raising exaggerated expectations, aware that Singapore can bring them back to reality. In fact, sources close to the paddock indicate that the pressure on Pierre Watch and the technical department is extremely high, as they must now demonstrate that the development philosophy adopted can be sustained on circuits that are not conducive to their natural characteristics. At the same time, rivals have begun to read between the lines of Verstappen's words after Baku. The Dutch driver made it clear that he still sees the title as a very difficult challenge, acknowledging that he would need a perfect scenario and a considerable dose of bad luck for McLaren to return to the top. Mackey's acknowledged that the gap to McLaren remains significant and that 2 wins on favorable circuits aren't enough to talk about a definitive comeback. His message, while positive, was clear. Red Bull must demonstrate consistency in adverse scenarios, and Singapore is the best barometer for measuring that progress. Helmut Marko, for his part, oscillated between optimism and realism. After the victory in Baku, he didn't hesitate to say that perhaps they could dream again, but in the same sentence, he acknowledged that Singapore would be the true benchmark for knowing where they stood. His speech reflects the tension within the team. On the one hand, the desire to believe in a rebirth, and on the other, the fear that reality will hit hard again. Marko knows that the championship, in mathematical terms, is a nearly impossible mission, and yet he can't help but harbor hopes that Verstappen could achieve the unthinkable. Verstappen, on the other hand, opted for a more serene and calculating approach. The 4-time world champion hasn't indulged in triumphalist rhetoric after his recent victories. He himself brought his footing back to earth, reminding them that they are still 69 points behind Oscar Piastri, and that the path to regaining the title requires not only his own victories, but also the mistakes of others. This cold, mathematical analysis contrasts with the enthusiasm of those around him and shows that Verstappen understands the magnitude of the challenge better than anyone. For him, the key isn't dreaming of the impossible, but rather confirming whether Red Bull can truly compete on terrain as hostile as Singapore, because only then will he have grounds to think bigger. The Singapore Grand Prix is not just another race on the calendar, but a true turning point that could completely redefine the narrative of the season. If Red Bull manages to be competitive at Marina Bay, even without a win, the impact would be enormous. Finishing close to McLaren on a track that has historically exposed all its weaknesses would send a clear message. The improvements introduced at Monza were not a simple temporary fix, but a structural change that expanded the RB21's true competitiveness. In that scenario, a podium in Singapore would have the same value as a win because it would confirm that the car has made a qualitative leap forward and can compete on high downforce circuits, where it has so far been vulnerable. But there is also the opposite risk, and it is the one most feared in Milton Keynes. If the car once again proves fragile in Singapore, struggling with the temperature, tire management, and a lack of confidence in slow corners, the psychological blow would be devastating. On a strategic level, the consequences are also evident. If Red Bull proves competitive in Singapore, it will be able to approach the final stretch of the calendar with an aggressive mindset, seeking to take advantage of every opportunity in Austin, Mexico, or Brazil, circuits that offer more varied settings and where the adaptation of the RB21 could yield positive results. Conversely, if they fail again at Marina Bay, the team would be forced to assume a secondary role for the remainder of the season, focusing more on securing a runner-up position and preparing for the 2026 project from the start, rather than wasting resources chasing a practically impossible dream. No less important is the psychological dimension. For McLaren, seeing Red Bull remain competitive on its favorite terrain would mean feeling the pressure of a real rival for the first time in the final stretch of the championship. This tension could lead to on-track errors or poor strategic decisions under the pressure of knowing they are being pursued. On the other hand, if Red Bull fails in Singapore, McLaren would emerge stronger, consolidating its authority and reducing any hint of uncertainty in the paddock. The battle wouldn't just be about timing, but also about perceptions, whether to confirm that Red Bull is reborn or whether it remains a team dependent on very specific scenarios. In terms of numbers, the situation remains extremely complicated. Despite having reduced the gap in the championship, Verstappen still depends on a near-perfect scenario to fight for the title. That means he must not only win or score podiums consistently, but he also needs Piastri and Norris to make mistakes or suffer reliability issues. It's a minimal, almost non-existent margin, but in Formula One, nothing can be taken for granted until the math confirms it. That thread of hope is what keeps Red Bull fighting and the public expectant. Singapore is the race that will define everything because it will test the technical advances, the new work philosophy, and the team's ability to maintain a competitive level in the most hostile conditions. The result will not only determine the course of the championship, but also the team's confidence that their project still has life in 2025. If Red Bull manages to remain competitive in Marina Bay, even without victory, it will have sent a message to the world. The fight is not over and there is still room to dream. This would mean that the improvements introduced were not a mirage, but a real change that could give them the tools to compete in the remaining races. However, if the car proves weak again, the effect will be devastating, and the hope of a resurgence will crumble. Singapore, therefore, will not just be a race, but a verdict, the confirmation of a rebirth, or the final verdict on a project that failed to sustain itself against McLaren's dominance. That's why I want you to tell me in the comments what you think. Do you think Red Bull has enough to pull off an upset in Singapore and keep the championship battle alive? Or do you think McLaren will continue its relentless dominance? Leave me your answer in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.